welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is September 18th. It's Wednesday, 2019. And tonight's topic, Fed cuts rates, but Trump blasts Jerome Powell's lack of vision. Before we get started, we have to celebrate some of the small things in life. The other night, during Saturday Night Silver with Smaulgld, we're talking about junk silver, and we were talking about the time that I actually found on the street a silver nickel. And I mentioned that it was interesting because I had gone out specifically to get a roll of nickels to see if I can find, on the very odd chance, a silver nickel. And indeed, I walked out my door, and as I was mentioning to the Smaulgld Mugs stackers last Saturday, that this is the silver nickel that I found. And when I arrived at the bank, I got 2 rolls of nickels, and I found this one, which is very strange to be able to find one on the street and one in the bank. Well, today I tested my luck, and I am very lucky in small things. I got 2 rolls of nickels. The first roll I open up, out pops, and I can see it immediately, a silver nickel. So a big day for me. These silver nickels are worth 95 cents each, so adding to my wealth. All right, let's get into what happened today. Today was very interesting because Jerome Powell and the Fed cut rates a quarter point. Now, quarter point wasn't real. Some people expected a bit more. I didn't, but let me tell you what Jerome Powell had to say afterwards about this whole rate cut. It was pretty non-eventful. A press conference, he gave his statement. He talked about how he thinks the economy's fine. We're looking for a favorable outcome. He doesn't think there's a recession on the horizon. He mentioned in respect to whether the Fed would ever go to negative interest rates. And this is something that I mentioned. I think the Fed wants to steer away from negative interest rates. It wants to be the reserve currency. I mean, you can't hold reserve assets if they're negative yielding. So one of the advantages is that the Fed actually pays a rate of interest, or U.S. Treasuries do. And he said that in the past what they've done, they talked about negative interest rates during the financial crisis, but they did not go that way. They went for asset purchases and bringing rates down, and also what they call forward guidance, which is basically just yakking at people and explaining to them why everything's going to be all right. But he did say that next time they probably wouldn't want to go to negative rates, but that they would go to these large-scale asset purchases. So this has become the toolbox. So you got a little problem and you whiff a recession, you got to do something. That's the Federal Reserve. That's the central banks. They feel they have to do something. They've got to print money and buy assets, and who knows what assets they're going to buy, because right now the Fed is not allowed to buy corporate bonds, corporate equity, or equities, and they haven't done so. But it sounds like what they're doing is, at the last meeting, they talked about what types of assets they might want to buy. They didn't specify. They said there's a report out next year which will outline what assets and what types of tools they may be looking to employ during the next downturn. And he also gave lip service to the concept that low rates are good, and that same thing that Bernanke and Yellen said about the wealth effect. When you have lower interest rates, you get higher asset prices, people buy cars, people buy homes, and that's a good thing. And he also mentioned that the yield curve, and this is something we've talked about here as well, I don't get too excited about the yield curve inverting and then spouting the typical cliche about it means there's going to be a recession in 6 to 24 months. Yield curve first inverted last December. We haven't had a recession since. And by the way, they measure it. And he mentioned, similar to the comments I made, is that things are different now than other times when the yield curve's inverted, because we're in this negative yield rate environment, especially with foreign bonds having these negative yields. And also, it does portend, perhaps globally, negative growth, but not perhaps the recession in the United States. But he says he does watch it carefully, but he wasn't dismissive of it. But he also said, as I have said, that it is certainly not dispositive. And that's about it for what Powell had to say. Now, what did the markets have to say? Then we're going to get into what Donald Trump had to say. Well, there is a correlation to the gold and silver prices. Clearly what happened today. So let's take a look at what happened to gold. gold was kind of drifting higher, and then you can see on the chart they were probably disappointed that there wasn't a half a point increase. The markets also, the dot plot indicated that there won't be more interest rate cuts this year. That doesn't mean there won't be, but it's just that's the indication what they're looking at. Of course, Powell says, and they always say they're data dependent, they look at stuff incoming. And so gold did take a bit of a fall, down 0.48%. And as we mentioned, it's below 1,500 now. Silver, when gold falls, silver falls more. Today was no exception. There is your silver price. Boom, down 1.5% versus 0.5%. And it's now below $18. It had also fell on the news. Both gold and silver did recover slightly. Now, we did have, if you look at Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies, they don't really track this stuff as much. Here's Bitcoin. I don't think you can derive anything from the Fed. Nothing really happened before or after. Bitcoin just been drifting down the last day, and it just went up and down and closed slightly down. But it was the altcoins that were a bit more on fire today. Ethereum, XRP, all rose today. Litecoin, and here is Ethereum. But again, not much of a correlation to the Fed. The Ethereum was just going up most of the day, and it continued to go up most of the day, drifted lower, went back up, but I wouldn't attribute any of this to the Fed. Same thing with Litecoin. Litecoin was kind of on a mission higher for a while, and the Fed really had no impact on its rise. And so there is not the same correlation, at least on Fed announcement day, for the cryptocurrencies as there appears to be for gold and silver, which are clearly there. Now, none of this is news to me. I have to always go back and say, not that I told you so, because I don't normally make predictions, but generally, when I do predict the direction of the Fed, like back in 2015 and 16 and 14 and 13, when I was saying the Fed would raise rates, when everyone was saying they wouldn't raise rates, well, they did indeed raise rates, and I also said they would raise them a lot more than all these people are saying they're not going to raise them, and then they said, well, that's the last time they're going to raise them, then they're going to cut rates. Well, I had been predicting that they would raise rates, and they actually raised rates. I said they'd get to 2.5%. They got to 2.25%. And I said this back in 2015 and 16 when everyone was saying there's no way they could raise rates. They're going to crash the economy. Okay, so earlier this year, I was saying, remember, this is, people kind of forget this, but at the beginning of the year, the whole prediction game was how many times the Fed would raise rates, not lower rates. And I started to think, no, this economy isn't moving that fast. Trump is going to be yelling and screaming. The data coming in, the Fed is already up about 2.25%. I thought maybe they pull one more out of the hat. They're way ahead of all the other foreign central banks. The foreign central banks are at negative, and now we know they're going even further negative. So the rationale for my prediction that the Fed would raise rates in the first place was because they wanted to put some space between themselves and the other central banks. So ECB, Bank of Japan, Bank of England, Bank of Denmark, all the European central banks in Japan were lowering their interest rates while the Fed was raising them. But there would come to a point where that spread would be wide enough that would give the Fed leeway to start cutting rates. And back in March, I think it was like with Hasbro Think here, saying that they should start considering cutting rates, and that was in March. And then in April, I actually came out and said, no, they will cut rates this fall. And this was a group of people on Twitter, a good group of people who follow economics. And the general consensus then was no one's going to raise interest rates now. I mean, no one's going to cut interest rates. They were thinking maybe they'll pause the interest rate hikes, but a rate cut didn't seem very likely. And I was calling for a rate cut this fall. That's exactly what we got. And then in June, just a couple of months later, all of a sudden, St. Louis Fed President Bullard is saying, well, you might need a rate cut. Well, that's what you call forward guidance coming out of St. Louis Fed President. And there it is. Just a couple of months after I was saying they're probably going to do that. And then, of course, the reaction was, whoa, what's going on here? What kind of madness is this, says our friend Jonathan Ehrlich. And I said, well, it's the madness you thought the Fed wasn't capable of. So there we are. Now, I think the Fed has said that the last interest rate cut they did was an inter-cycle tightening, in trying to indicate that they weren't now starting to lower rates. It was just that they had lowered rates at one time. Well, now they've lowered rates another time, and it probably seems inexorable. They'll probably lower rates again. And the other thing that Powell talked a lot about was the idea that the trade that deals with China, that is uncertainty that they can't really factor in. And, well, Trump reacted today. And what did he say? Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve fail again. No guts, in quotes. No sense. That's the bonehead part. And no vision, a terrible communicator. Oh, well, Donald Trump not happy. But keep in mind, at the beginning of the year, they were going to raise rates a few times. So at least he's gotten them, or someone's gotten them, or the economy's gotten them, or whatever, with the realization that they had rates too high compared to other central banks. They've cut rates twice already, so they're down 0.5 point. The other thing the Fed has been doing is this repo buying, which to me is almost like QE. I mean, they're buying, they're going into the market, quote, providing liquidity. I'm calling that QEPO, QEPO, and it looks like Fed runs Repo Tuesday amid worries about keeping its benchmark rate in check. It's clearly central bank intervention going on, and Trump was actually hoping, I don't know what he was hoping for today, not just not maybe 0.5 point cut. I think he wanted QE announced. I don't think he quite understands. I mean, the Fed never just springs that kind of stuff on you. No one was expecting them to announce QE, but he probably wanted, I guess he doesn't go by the book, but he doesn't realize that the Fed is a very cautious. They do signal most of their moves. They try to go out in front of it and gain consensus, like what they did with Bullard in June, like rate cuts are coming. They came in August, and then they came in September. So it wasn't really a shock. Maybe the shock when they give the forward guidance, but that gives people time to adjust before the actual day of the announcement, so that people have already adjusted and everything is priced in, except somehow the gold markets and silver markets always seem to get hit no matter what. All right. So I also want to talk about what's going on with the channel the last couple of days. I don't even know what we have in terms of audience tonight. So let me just come over and see. Yeah, something is definitely up. We only got 15 here. But last night, the last 2 nights, Fiona was the only one here. Fiona Whalen. It was very strange. And I looked at the numbers, and after an hour or two, we only had 30 people listening, who had watched the video. I'm getting more views on BitChute, but it's not, that's a separate audience. I mean, I understand some people have gone over there. That's great. And then you just watch over there. But we still get hundreds more, or we're getting hundreds more, and having people show up in the chat. And let me just show you a couple of things, and I'll get to your comments, just to be aware of. This is why I don't like YouTube. And I guess they're listening. They don't like me saying this. But let me just show you a couple of things. So supposedly, I have about almost 4,000 subscribers. Okay, that's a decent number. So you would think more than 30 people out of those 4,000 might show up on a given night. But here's what we had. Here's the lonely Fiona. Now this is 17 minutes into an 18-minute video, and I had announced this in advance. This was scheduled. If you rang the bell, you should have been notified. Apparently, many weren't. But there's Fiona. She's on her own in the chat there, and that's not just the top chat. There was no one in the full live chat either. And basically, it was time to finish, and she was the only one there. And then I got this note here from DW under the video. He says, I have the bell noted to notify me of your broadcast, but I don't receive any notice. What am I doing wrong? Well, I don't think he's doing anything wrong, or she's doing anything wrong. I think it's YouTube, something wrong with it, because I didn't see this issue on other channels. And he, I guess, came by the channel, saw the video, and said, oh, I missed it, but I had it scheduled to be on. What else on YouTube here? Okay, so now here is the video from last night. The video is Bitcoin for coffee or Lambos or both. Now, I understand there's some people on YouTube that follow Smaulgld, they're not interested in cryptocurrencies, but there's a decent number. It's not like I've had videos on cryptocurrencies and no one shows up. And this one was, I don't know, I put a lot of work into this one. This one I talked about the concept of being just one coin and all other coins, but not worth going into the content. You can go back and look at it. But look at this one. This one had been up. It's at 170 views right now. Only 164 views. Now, if you go over to BitChute, where's BitChute? Here it is. Has 191 views. Now, BitChute, let me just give you an example of the difference between the two channels. First of all, there's nearly 4,000 Smaulgld subscribers on YouTube. I only got 161 views. BitChute, I have 261. So basically, anyone who's subscribed to BitChute, generally I get I average between 200 and 400 views there, which means I get pretty much all the subscribers, and I get whoever else comes around and takes a look at it. And that's pretty good. That's a good thing. But when you got 4,000 subscribers on YouTube and you get 30 views in the first 2 hours, and then you get 170, there's something not right there. I don't know what it is, but I just point that out in case the channel goes away or it's just not worth doing YouTube anymore. I know the other night someone said, "I'm glad you're back on YouTube," and I said, no, I'm not. I only do this because there's some people who insist on YouTube, like YouTube. I just don't understand why you would like YouTube other than they do the live stream. All right, let's get into your comments. I'll put back up that's why I do appreciate the patronage, because I'm not going to get it. And I never had advertising on this anyway. I'm not going to put it up now. But it is important that the type of channel this is, it's not going to get tens of thousands of views and lots of patrons, because it's not a pumper channel. And you have to have an acquired taste for the Bernie and the Mario Draghi and the who else do I do? Seamus and Janet Yellen imitations. All right, let's see what we have. We do have Fiona, so she's first here again today, but she's not on her own, and she's here with Ann Holloman. That's the other thing. I know I have women that are on my channel, women patrons, and YouTube's analytics say I have 100% male audience. 100%. It's been like that forever. Now, you could say, well, statistically, maybe if you have 1 or 2 women out of 4,000. No, I know I don't. I know that there's more women. So I just don't even know how they're supposedly these great data analytics, and they're saying I have 100% male audience. Fiona says, hopefully it's just beginning. You'll find more precious stuff. Well, I'm telling you that I felt very lucky. Both times I went out to get nickels. Someone said, well, just why don't you go out and get yourself a gold coin? You're so lucky. I wish I was. I got the both right here. I don't know where the other one is. I had to take pictures of the new one. I don't believe DW. There he is. I don't believe the U.S. will go negative rate soon. The rest of the world are buying out T-bills. We're one of the few that do offer a positive rate. Yes, that is exactly the point, DW. All right, Fiona Williams, Smaulgld, do you think if the cryptos don't react on types of today's news that they are still very much retail market? There's not much significant institutional participation yet. Well, that is true. There isn't. Now, let's see what happened when Backed launches on Monday, the 23rd, and how that impacts. It should only impact the Bitcoin market. Although the other day, Backed put out a notice giving away Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I guess they're planning on launching Ethereum. And DW says there'll be no official recession because the government changed the data, so it'll not pass the mark to reflect the recession. Well, the last time they changed the data was a while back, and they added stuff in there that you would not consider economic growth, like, I don't know, screenplays. There was all kinds of weird stuff in order to make it look like a recession. What I do is I generally, when I look at the GDP, I don't get involved. And the same with the employment numbers with their BS. They are, but there's an internal logic to their own BS. So, yes, they don't reflect like 2%, 2.9% unemployment. But how they calculate it, I believe they probably calculate everything consistent within its own nonsense. So when I say there's not going to be a recession because of the inverted yield curve, I don't mean... What I mean is that the way they measure it, it won't go negative, or might most likely won't go negative. All right. AUAG, QE forever and ever. Well, yes, QE, they seem to be more inclined to go the asset purchase route. And I actually think that's smart. I don't think either is smart. But if I were a central banker, if you had that power, you would, I mean, unless you have self-restraint, and if someone told you can go out and spend as much money as you want, and you can either give yourself a lower rate on your credit card or get paid to spend your money, or you could just go out and buy whatever you want, then I think you would choose spending the money and buying whatever you want. I mean, the other way, you don't really get much bang for the buck, because now you have to go out and buy stuff. You still have to pay for it. You may get money back on negative interest rates. But if you have the power just to print the money and go buy stuff, then why bother with the negative interest rates? It's just one way of looking at it. Dan is here. You guys are chatting about Doge. Yeah, Fiona says, Smaulgld, the last couple of nights it was really eerie. I agree. I mean, it's not that this channel is the most popular channel on the planet, but it has been around since 2013. I have 25 patrons, which is not a lot, and 5 subscribe star, and I know dozens of others. These are people who actually buy, and I've sold hundreds of mugs, so I know that there's some people out there that are interested in the channel, and it has 4,000 subscribers. When you only get 30 people, there is something wrong. So it was eerie. I don't expect to see thousands of people here every night, but I do expect to see the normal crowd, and it fluctuates. But when I see just a couple of people watching and only 30 people after a few hours, I mean, I think you can start a channel tomorrow and just open up the line, and you probably attract a dozen people. All right, let's see. You guys are talking about Dogecoin. I'd like to buy Dogecoin. I think it's like pennies or something. I always wanted to buy like something that has the potential. You can buy like 1,000 of it for just basically nothing, and if it goes to $1 each, you make $1,000. All right, what else do we have here? Fiona. The fact that you found your silver nickel today proves that silver is not money. Otherwise, somebody would have picked it up before you, according to the Chicago School of Economics. That's right. But I didn't. That one today. I didn't find one on the floor today. That was a while back. That was like 5-6 years ago. Today it was in the. Well, here's a trick I learned. I didn't know this. When I didn't find that out this time. When I went to the bank once, I asked for a roll of pennies or nickels, whatever it was. And she says, do you want them people rolled or bank rolled? I was like, what the hell is people rolled? She says, well, the bank rolled ones come from the bank, and the people rolled ones are ones that actual people have rolled themselves. And I said, what difference does it make? She said, well, the people rolled ones, you're more likely to find like stuff in it. And I go, what do you mean? She says, well, are you a coin collector? I said, not really. She said, well, you're more likely to find like old coins. And I said, oh, all right, then give me the people roll. And you look through them. Now, I didn't ask for, I just asked for 2 rolls of nickels. Again, I should have known to ask for. And they were, now that I remember, they were. Yeah, they were people rolled. That's why the silver nickel was in there. Because if they came from the bank, and they have the bank roll, and the way you could tell people roll versus bank roll is it folds at the end. I should have taken a picture so you guys could see it. But if you've ever gotten coins at the bank, they look much more solid when they're rolled by the bank, by the machine, than the when they're, quote, people rolled. But the people roll is where you're going to find your silver nickels, your silver dimes, silver quarters, or whatever they may have. All right, so let's see. Does hitting the thumbs up button help your channel, says DW? I haven't looked enough into this, but I understand that getting subscribers and having people like it. The other thing that's important, I don't know if you guys do this, is sharing stuff. How many times it gets moved around and shared directly from the box. And I think underneath you can send it via Twitter, Facebook, a couple other places. I think that helps. Time that you watch it. Like if you come on and you listen for 2 minutes and turn it off, that hurts. But apparently if you're on there for the whole stream or most of the stream, that helps. There's all kinds of algorithms. But again, I wasn't doing very well in the algorithm anyway, but it just fell off the table the last 2 days. And I also noticed they didn't the other thing they rank it on is they could recommend your video, and the last two weren't recommended at all. Maybe it's because they don't like Mario Draghi. They think it's some type of impersonation or something. I don't know. All right, let's see. Canada is not dropping rates yet. The bankroll should be stripped as silver. Yes, AUAG. I didn't realize that. But the people could not realize they have silver, and they will put it in there. Although at the bank the other day, I always look to see if they have 50-cent pieces, and they never do, because I know you can sometimes get a silver one. And I said, "Oh, you have?" And he says, "Yeah." And they gave me like 3 of them, and but one of them was a 40%er, so that does happen too. I don't think they check them as well. Who knows? Certainly, you're more likely to get something in a people roll than you are in a bankroll, because the bank, like these P's we talked about during Saturday Night Silver, the history of junk silver. The reason they put the P on the silver nickel was so that the banks could remove them easily. So clearly, a bank rolled roll of nickels is not going to have, or chances are, far less likely to have a silver nickel in it. All right, let's see. We got Taylor Collins says bonjour. Well, I think it's more like bonsoir. Wouldn't the people rolls be ones that people already looked over and rewrapped? DW. That's possible, yes. But people rolls are also people who roll and have no idea what they're rolling. They're just saying, "Oh, I got all these pennies, let me just throw them in the rolls." So not everybody, I mean, you ask somebody to go through change, they probably don't look at their change. They probably just say, "Oh, it's a nickel." They have 10 nickels, they add them up. They don't examine them. But you're right. Some of the people rolls, if the people are paying attention, they'll obviously pull stuff out. But if they're just people who are companies, or just people who just don't pay attention to that kind of stuff, and there's more and more of them who don't pay attention, because the stamp collecting has gone away. There's no one who's a stamp collector anymore. I don't think many people are coin collectors anymore under the age of 40 or 50. So I'm sure when people go through their change, they're just looking to turn it in for what they call money. So if they can roll up $2 worth of nickels, they're not looking, it's an old one. Okay, that one's got a P on. Okay, they might not even see it. When I opened it today and I rolled it on the Smaulgld table, first thing I saw was this big P, and I was like, "Whoa, I'm a lucky man." There we go. All right, what else do we have here? Mace Williams Smalls. That's a good name. Do you think we're headed for a similar deflationary situation that we saw in 2008 without a housing market crash leading to deflation by year, or inflation before major deflation hits? You got inflation, stagflation. The central banks, if you look at the macro economy, we are in, without the central banks, clearly a macro economy that should be very, very deflationary. They've done everything they could, because any asset they buy is an asset that no one would have bought. That's why they bought it. The interest rates being low, artificially low, and they go lower. What China's done, when they build stuff that they don't need, that's just bringing demand forward beyond what will even be used. A lot of the stuff that they built will fall into disuse and never be used. Or even if it is used, still the demand is brought forward, which means if they use it in 4 years from now, well, 4 years from now, that means they don't have to build anything. So again, you can't create more demand that's already been brought forward and have it count, because that would be double counting. So what they do is, in order to get the GDPI, is they build stuff they don't need today, and they count it as growth today. Well, if it actually is going to be used 4 years from now, well, then they don't need to build it then. But we know how that works. They'll also build stuff 4 years from now that they won't need, and they'll just keep pushing it out. But that highlights that the growth isn't that robust, and that we really are in deflationary times, but for the central bank buying stuff and bringing interest rates down. So I don't think we're in a inflationary type of situation. And if we are in a deflationary situation, but for the central banks, and then they go negative, that means that we are in a situation where you have positive. The gold is positive because it's not negative. I mean, gold doesn't cost you anything other than the storage fees, which are much less than the negative interest rate, and it's not a depreciating currency. See, the problem with a negative rate in the dollar or any other currency is not only you're not making money on your quote money or on your currency, the currency itself is being devalued. So not only you'll owe less, but you'll get less when the principal is paid, because the value of the principal of $100 today, when you get it paid back in 3 or 4 years, is going to be less. And then during those 3 or 4 years, you lost money too on the negative rate. Whereas gold is going to be gold, and most likely in 4 years, in any given 4-year period over the last, 50 years, gold's gone up. I mean, it's gone up and down, but if you hold it over 5-6 years, it's always gone up. All right. Arian Gorman, I like your Italian accent. Well, you know that when the Federal Reserve is not really buying assets, it is very drunk. I can't take the guy serious. I couldn't take Janet Yellen seriously either. Highly accommodative monetary policy. The committee says I did not even know the Fed funds rate can go over the Fed's mandated, is that the correct term, range. But the repo rate spiking tonight made the Fed funds rate. Yeah, it's amazing that people actually have this confidence in central banks and how they get defended, and they just take it as when they talk about this stuff. If you were talking about this 20 years ago, negative interest rates, well, we don't know whether we should buy $4 trillion worth of bonds or $6 trillion, or whether the negative rate should be a 0.5 point or 1 point. We're not quite sure. But tools, we have to look to fiscal policy. Then if you want to do the helicopter drop, you need to look at the fiscal policy. The monetary policy today is not able to put money directly into the depositor's bank account. What a shame that the ECB can't put money into depositor's account. But when Christine Lagarde, she come in, she's gonna do it nice. All right, let's see what else do we have here. France, j'ai faim. Taylor Collins is hungry. You're hungry. J'ai faim. Okay, even though I took 8 years of French, bonjour is all I retained. Yeah, comme ci, comme ça. Wow, got all the Frenchies here tonight. I live close to Montreal. Montreal. Okay, so when I use it, I visit there. Better at speaking French than writing it. LOL. En français. Je suis désolé. French is my first foreign language that I mastered. I worked in France for 2 years in the 90s. Unfortunately, it's hard to practice here. Become rusty. Well, you could practice here every night. Yes. Je suis Louis. Did anyone know? Okay, let's see. I'm recouping my French slowly. Escargot. All right, wow, this has become a real French festival here. All right. What else do we have? RICO charges against JPM Precious Metals Trading. We covered that. Sleepless nights for the central banker, says AU. Taylor says, Je comprends. Je comprends. Beaucoup. All right. Every time I'm going to... what's this? Financial empowerment movement. Every time I think it's going to end tomorrow and I'm about to head to my bunker to count my eagles. I remember my grandpa and great-grandpa who stacked and thought the same from 1910 to now. Yeah, it is amazing. All right, DW is out of here. We'll be seeing you. Les États-Unis. All right, what else do we have? I do French, but it's because it intrigued me to learn new languages. All right. J'adore le français. Oh, okay. All right, well, that's it for me. I'm glad you guys showed up tonight. Almost in full force. It's 26 people watching. It seems like YouTube has its act together tonight. Well, if you missed the last couple of episodes, go back, check them out. The patrons have them. The Subscribestar people have them. The YouTubers have them. The bit shooters have them. Smaulgld.com has them. So we haven't lost anything. And I will say bonne nuit when I say mis amis. Au revoir.